Hello, and you're listening to the Zone of Hot Truth, a weekly podcast by four aspiring DMs where we try to go through our experiences, opinions, and hot takes in supposedly 15 minutes. I'm Kevin.
I'm Eric, and I always try to pour 2 cups of coffee, one for backup just in case.
I'm John, and baby, all I want for Christmas is these hot takes.
I'm Grant, and that coffee idea is stupid. That's why you have a thermos, Eric. You actually have 2 mugs. Why?
For backup.
One's for water. Drink from it right now.
Thermos.
We have the first.
It was
first
empty. It
series
was
of
empty. There was
attacks.
water in it. Exactly. Empty. What a load of bullshit.
Okay, now we're done with the initial hostilities. Thank you, Eric. Our topic for today is going to be to answer the question, can a player unknow something? So this is just in regards to the idea of metagaming, in the sense of if player receives some sort of information, right, can they act on it as if they hadn't, right? I think that's the crux of this is what we're trying to get at. So what do we think?
No. I don't think a player can unknow something.
No, I don't think you can unknow something.
Who knows? The 2 of them might end up changing my mind by the end of this, but I actually think yes. I actually think a player can restrain themselves and unknow something for the purposes of the game.
Bold of you to assume that I can change somebody's opinion.
Yeah, right.
You almost did it on a few other episodes.
So I'll go ahead and start kind of talking about it, I think. So I say yes, and the reason for that is I think that there's a huge caveat I want to say of for certain players, but
Don't hedge.
So it's this is very hard to make a general statement about that I can fully dive into and be like, yes, this is for certain. But what I'll say is I think yes, in the sense of if you give a player, let's say for example, you give them information about a monster, right? Or they're a DM. I think that's a classic case, right? You're a DM. They know every monster in the book. You throw a monster at them as a DM for them, right? And you end up with they know all the stat block, they know the weaknesses, everything. Can they justify that? Is that something they can just go into and not deal with? And I think yes, but this is something that I think we mentioned in previous podcasts about the idea of self-regulation is important here. So I think if that is brought up maybe in the session, if you know something and you really want to bring it into play, go through the DM filter first. And I think that's a way to deal with that self-regulation.
I think that's hard, though, especially with... So you mentioned the DM weakness, knowing weaknesses to monsters. The classic example is a troll. The troll regeneration function. Yeah. Once you know that, if you're a wizard and you have Firebolt, it is really difficult because you're in a bind. Both the player knows the weakness, and thus they can't cast Firebolt for the implication that they're metagaming. They can't not cast it because they know how bad of an action that's going to end up being. And I feel like that places a kind of this dual role on the players. And that's why I'm saying they can't know something, is because that's harmful. That's harmful for the experience, because then there's the pressure on them.
That's actually a very good point, but I think that's where a little bit of restraint on the player side can help alleviate that solution, where they can always ask the DM if they're unsure of I know this but my character doesn't, I don't want to metagame. You can always ask to make some sort of check, I don't know, I'm a wizard, I'm pretty smart, can I recall any sort of weaknesses that trolls might have? And if your DM allows you to make the roll, you will roll high. Boom, that could be a potential solution around it. It might not be the ideal solution, but there are things the player can try to do in character to get the answer to come up.
Could be an RP opportunity too, in some way, where they throw an ice blast and it does nothing, and they hit fire and they oh shit, it works, kind of a thing. But to go along with kind of what Grant said, but yeah,
you sacrifice a attack to do ice to be okay, I know that cantrip won't work. Time to try something else.
So I don't know. I do think that you can't know something, but I largely don't think it matters, because you can, as a DM. When I play, if I know something, I ask the DM, hey, would my character know this? I asked it to Eric a bunch when he was running Descent into Avernus for us.
Sometimes.
No.
For what it's worth, he did.
Yes.
I'll give him credit to it.
Like,
yeah.
the skull, when the skull burning fiends, I could list them. But anytime I knew something that was in the book that my character, that I was unsure of my character not knowing, I said, would I know this? Eric always just said yes.
Because there's a lot of pressure on a DM to say yes, for what it's worth.
I don't think that's true. I've always just said roll for it and set CR at 10 plus, or I set the DC at 10 plus CR. You would recall something if you hit that, or if you had encountered the creature before. Real simple, no pressure, pretty easy. Like, I don't think you can unremember something, but I don't think it really matters that much. It's, you just say, hey, would my character have encountered this before? Would they have read about something before? Quick, simple roll, and then if they do, you tell them, and you're fine.
Yeah. It still brings up the troll problem, I think, that Eric mentioned. Like, let's say the answer to that question is no. They just left town. They don't know about the troll. Would they know anything about that? Like they're an isolated village or something. You can't be like, they know through traders or stories, blah, blah, blah. Sure, you can think of any rationalization for
Absolutely.
that. Yeah. What do you do in that situation?
So then that comes down to, my example is my artificer. My artificer always fucking casts Firebolt. If he's out of melee range and can't punch the fucking thing, he casts Firebolt. If I cast Firebolt on the troll, like, that's not metagaming, that's just my bread and butter.
Yes, but that's kind of solving the question with what you're saying. Instead, if you say your bread and butter is casting Ice Knife, or whatever frost cantrip, Ray of Frost, and the creature's immune to frost, and you know this because you're a DM, or you know the lore, or whatever, and how many turns do you have to do of guessing? You roll low every time. You're not your DM, your Arcana check, or whatever the stupid 5th edition check.
It's the way I have it is based on, like, the type of monster.
Sure.
Beast nature, religion.
That aside, how many times are you supposed to fail before you can arbitrarily choose to succeed?
Exactly one, because you Ice Knife and it does nothing.
So then you have to try, next is Shocking Grasp, or is next Firebolt? Like, do you see how there's another check? You roll again low, and plus, on top of that, when you say, does my character know what the weaknesses of trolls? That instantly signals to all the other players that there's a specific weakness to trolls.
Oh, yeah, I don't think that is a problem. The thing about it is, there are visual cues of what something is weak to. I have a pretty good idea that I shouldn't fireball the Afridi. It's a creature that is literally on fire. Okay, so, like, there are some weaknesses that are or resistances or immunities that are just, like, fucking smack you in the face.
Yeah.
But there are some that aren't like that, and for those, if you do know them, that's when I think a simple roll comes into place.
You're assuming they're succeeding.
Then that doesn't matter. If they try it, they fail, then they know, then they gain that, then they and their character gain that information.
I was just going to quickly add on with the whole, once one player asks about a weakness, the others might assume, oh, that means there's a weakness. But if the other 3 players don't know what that weakness is, and the one player who does know just has their strength to ask to make the check, they fail. Okay, Chilling Touch. Oh, shit. It's regenerating HP. The other 3 players still aren't going to know, and they're still going to have to try to figure things out.
Yeah, I think kind of like in that vein, I think my problem with this is how, like, I think Eric kind of alluded to this, how the information is conveyed, because you might be spoiling the experience for the other players. And that's usually the issue I have the problem with, because it, like, if you say, do I know this, or do I know something I think is vague enough, but I like the idea of, like, it's still, like, not in my wheelhouse. I kind of like the idea, and this is something I haven't explored, of, like, you texting me, right? And then we have that thing, and so if you do, then we have that back and forth. Because I don't like when it's like, they know this kind of thing, and they can't help but say it, because that usually tends to happen a lot of the time, which goes into the notion of self-restraint. But go ahead.
Have you tried texting before?
No, this is something I said I have yet to explore, but I kind of like that idea.
My ears, they don't listen.
So I understand. Yep. Yeah.
So I have done, not for necessarily information, but for when players are trying to hide information from other players, I have done texting before. Mixed results. Sometimes it's a waste of time and drags out because we're sitting in a fucking basement and I have to wait the 30 seconds for their fucking ting service to get the text message that I sent.
Sticky notes like we did in Game of Thrones. Yeah, I think.
I've also had players message me in Discord about in similar instances or just questions, and when I'm DMing, I can't tell you the number of times I've glanced at Discord finally and been like, oh, they sent me a message an hour ago about that combat, but I'm running the combat. I don't have time to glance to my other monitor for discard. I'm running the monsters, asking them what they're doing, looking at initiative. So the texting, in theory, it could work, and but in my experience, it's very hit or miss for if I see it in time for it to be relevant.
It's more cognitive. It's exactly like you said. It's more cognitive load on the DM.
Yeah.
Another situation though that with the troll problem is that even fun for a player to have to go through the motions of not knowing, especially if, for example, the situation starts to get worse. If a player knows a Hydra's the head mechanics, or even anywhere close to the head mechanics of a Hydra in 5th edition or whatever edition, at some point, how many failed rolls, or how much like the DM finally saying, no, you can't roll anymore. Your character doesn't know. Your background is from this isolated village. There's not a single chance you would know.
Yeah.
How long until the player is going to feel compelled to act?
I kind of I feel like this is a little bit of a pivot, but I think it's parallel because this is a parallel situation, and I think it's because of the structure of the game that this happens. But often what we'll have are situations where, let's say, two parties are in separate locations. One party knows something, and they learned it at the table that everybody else can hear, right? And the other party has to act on whether, like, you want them most of the time to act like they hadn't heard it, that they weren't there. And in that case, they can't unknow it, but you expect them to act like they haven't known it. And is that different from combat? Like, in that sense that you have this expectation that if we're in combat, sure, but in that it's an obvious situation where you know that this person is lying about this, right? Like, I think it's a very similar situation.
I think you're right that it is similar, but it's different in the fact of remember, like, knowing information is usually not life or death situation. In Eric's hypothetical of the combat spiraling out of control,
sometimes,
sometimes, like, you can have life or death situations, but I think that's way easier to separate. Also, I do think the like table knowledge versus player knowledge is totally a can of worms that we can get into in a different episode.
I think it's very related.
I wanted to start this episode not hedging at all, but Eric's argument kind of caught me off guard. I think out of combat, and when it comes to party splits and non-combat and fighting-related information, I do still think it is very easy for a player to ignore it and just do what their character would do with what they actually have. But the combat example, specifically the troll, has kind of made me shift a little bit. And I think in combat, an example, the troll Hydra, I think the best you can expect a player to do is do like one attack, like Chilling Touch, crap, didn't work, and then just switch to Firebolt. Like, give a minimal amount of give to the DM, or at least ask to make a check and act in good faith if you fail that check, and then try to RP things out.
I'm just going to say that we're coming up on the 15-minute mark, so why don't we go ahead on just mentioning...
Sorry.
Thank you. That was excellent, Grant. If you were wondering who did that. So I think why don't we go ahead and let's go around the horn and just give our tweet, our final thought. I'll make that clear. Like, give your 140 character answer as to like what you think about this question.
Oh god.
Which is, can a player unknow something?
No, they can't unknow something, nor should they have to. It puts a lot of pressure on them. It puts a lot of pressure on you as a DM. It's something you'll have to talk about with your table, but it can't happen. You can't unknow.
I think you can't unknow something. I don't think it matters. I think you can solve this with either a simple dice roll, that simple math to do, or through player, like, character intuition, and as they're exploring a fight across multiple turns, seeing different things work or not work, or things react differently through narration.
I think you can unknow things, but it does require you as the player to work with the DM. You have to be willing to just cut them some slack and find a solution through RP, asking for skill checks, and work with the DM. Well, not work with them, but just help them out ish.
All right, so I think what I'll leave you with is I think, yes, that is a player can unknow something. And what you should do is train that in your players in some capacity. Note that this is something that you want in your game that is important to you. And with that thought, what I'll say is you can reach us at the zoneofhottruth@gmail.com, or just find us on Twitter or a number of social media platforms. I'm sure you can find that in the little anchor link that we have. And what I'll say is thank you for listening, and keep rolling those dice.